This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
So I want to ask you a question. I know a lot about you just because I know you so well. I've known you for 40 years, for maybe a little less, 38 years, something like that.
I think more than 40, 85, 95, 15, yeah, about 40.
About 40 years. So but before you got to Villanova, before you got to USA Basketball, before you got, you kind of retired now, doing a little consulting. Consulting is right, correct, for the cycling?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You start off, now you're an athlete first. And I hate to pin you down time-wise, but you play football at Albion College in Michigan. Is it Albion College?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you finished 9-0 in your last year. Third in Division III.
Second in Division III.
Oh, I read third. I mean, was this we had an issue with the rankings then? Is this before the college?
Well, no, we were. I guess it depends on coach's poll or AP poll or whatever. But yeah, we were second in D3 and had the top ranked defense in D3.
What position did you play?
I was a defensive tackle.
Okay, yeah, I was right.
Back then at 225. So you could play defensive tackle at 225.
So what did you learn about athletes and being a part of a team that you would take into your career? You work with athletes. We're talking about Michael Jordan. We're talking about Magic Johnson, LeBron James, and guys, college guys, right, like Eddie Pinckney before that. How did you learn, or I guess what did you take about being an athlete yourself into your career at working with athletes?
That's a great question because there's a couple things. One is I think I learned the bond of hard work. And I think anybody that's been in a team sport, it can be high school, can be college, can be pro, obviously. But when you work with a bunch of guys and you're sweating and you put the, as they say, the blood and sweat into what you're doing, there's a bond there that is incredible. And I've seen it through multiple generations now. As you said, when I was at Albion, my best friends still to this day are my teammates. There's about 10 of us that have stayed in contact. We play golf in Florida together. We do vacations with our wives together. It's a pretty remarkable thing. And again, I attribute that to you have to depend on them and they have to depend on you. And if you're weak, you kind of get weeded out. And if you're strong, that bond just further tightens. And then the part that really benefited me, I think, was understanding an athlete day to day. They're going to have bad days. So from a media standpoint, a communication standpoint, when I go to someone to get an interview, it may not be a great day for them because maybe they had a shitty practice and, they're not in a good place. So you kind of learn that everything isn't always rosy and great with an athlete every day. Obviously NBA guys make a ton of money, but they still have a great pride in what their product is, what their abilities are. And, they don't like being shown up. They don't feeling like they didn't do something. So that gave me an appreciation that every day you have to be able to judge that individual and understand, hey, he may not be having a great day. Maybe let him slide today. Now, you can't do it all the time, obviously, but there are days just that aren't going to be good days. And I think I learned that through sports and participating.
Your ability to kind of communicate and connect with these guys, how did you dip into that when you got to get a guy, and we'll get into some stories later, and I'm jumping around a little bit, but you've got to get a guy, you need a guy to do an interview after he had a shitty game because, he's the marquee guy on the team. What do you say to him to get him out there?
Well, I'm fortunate that when I worked at USA Basketball, I had generally when we worked with Olympic teams or World Cup teams, we had 12 superstars, right? So it wasn't like you had to go to one person over and over. Now, I worked, and I'm sure we'll get into this, I worked with the Dream Team, and, obviously Jordan was the superstar of superstars at that time. But if you had to find someone to do interviews. It didn't always have to be Michael. It could have been Magic, could have been Charles Barkley, could have been Patrick Ewing, whoever on that team. Maybe not Christian Legner so much, but even Christian had a great story. But so yeah, you had to spread the wealth, and I think one of the things that struck me with those teams early on was nobody wanted to come across as a prima donna or someone with an ultra super ego that was too good to do things or not do things for the team. So typically, if you weren't overusing them, they were fine. But it wasn't always easy. There are guys that just don't like to do media, and you kind of have to develop a relationship, and you have to be honest and sell why this interview is a good interview. If it's not obvious, like a post-game interview on the court, it's pretty obvious. But to get up on practice day and do a half hour earlier than normal and do an interview may be a little tougher sell at times.
And you can see the guys' eyes open, and you can see the wheels start to move when you really are, oh, okay, this is why. And I believe, too, because, again, being a former athlete, there is an authenticity there. I mean, some guys just don't want to do it, and they're gonna shut you off. But there is a relatability, like, okay, this guy kind of gets it. I mean, because Craig, you're different than most of the sports information PR guys that I met when I worked in the NBA, or you just are. You're a little gruffer. You're more to the point. Really. I mean, you are.
I've been accused of that. Yeah, for
sure. You're like you literally are an extension of the team, but at the same time, you know that you're an extension of the media. So you have a job to do.
Exactly, and my credibility was always really important. So, unlike some organizations or some teams that are in a position where they have to maybe protect and cover for a player, I would to a certain degrry, but if someone didn't want to do an interview, I wasn't one to put the interview off and say, well, maybe next week. I would say, hey, doesn't want to do it. And I'm not going to persuade them.
Yeah.
I don't have that. I never thought that I had that power. I never thought I would be able to persuade people to do things they didn't want to do. And it really started to change in the late 90s when the contracts got so big, because I tell a story that I think is pretty typical. For the 92 team, I had a team of PR guys, and we divided the 12 players up into groups of 4. So there was 3 PR people. We each had 4 players, and I had Karl Malone was one of my players. And Karl Malone said to me, hey, I'll do any media you can get me. I've been in the Utah market. I want to be in the spotlight. So we actually went into the Olympic compound, broadcast compound for NBC, and went through and did a bunch of interviews and part of that was he wanted endorsements and he wanted a higher profile. Well, nowadays, the contracts are so huge, the endorsement deals aren't enough to sway someone to do media, where before it did.
Yeah, I mean, that was a money-making opportunity for a guy like Karl Malone to be on that 92 team. Again, this is before he's playing in the NBA Finals. That was his chance to sort of cash in, or at least try to.
Yeah, I mean, he'd get his name known. He'd get, obviously was the elite of the elite, so you were proud to be part of that. But nowadays you get guys who are, not necessarily the marquee player with huge contracts, and so it's that really made it much more challenging. And then social media obviously blew everything up, because now they had their own avenues to doing things, and then if you wanted them to do social media, sometimes you were almost a competitor with them, or could be a competitor with them. But what we found, and the NBA does a great job of this, is sharing content and assets with the players. So yeah, you do this interview, we'll get you some footage. You can actually run the interview. You can run the photos. You can use this footage, and they're much more welcoming then, because it's something for them and their social media groups to do.
Before there were these kind of relationships in social media, and you were at USA Basketball, you worked in Milford. That was your first job. You worked.
So you've done some research. The Milford Times,
dude. I knew all this stuff. I mean, I had to brush up a little bit, but I remember a story you told me about when you worked at the Milford Times. Is that you, among all the hats you wore, one of them, you were an obituary writer, and
yes,
you said that experience kind of chased you out of the newspaper business and the media business.
Well, yeah, my dad was a newspaper guy. Wrote for the Cleveland Plain Dealer, wrote for the Detroit News, was a sports editor for the Detroit News, ultimately became a layout makeup editor for the Detroit News, helped them usher into the computer era, if you can believe that. So I always kind of gravitated towards sports and gravitated toward writing. And when I left Albion College, I had served as the student sports editor, which was an interesting conflict of stories. I could tell some stories about the football team losing a game, and I had to write the story. And I once wrote that their title, the league championship title hopes were crushed because we lost a game. And the head coach called me into the office and said, "So you don't think we can win the title anymore?" And I was like, "Coach, we're like 2-5. We'd have to win our last 3 games, and beat teams that are 2 of them were unbeaten, I think, at the time." And he said, "Well, I see where you're standing." So I learned a pretty important line there and I tried to tell him, "Oh, that's the journalist in me speaking. It's not the athlete in me speaking." But I don't think he was buying any of that. But yeah, so when I graduated from college, I actually wanted to go into professional sports PR. And, I lived with a bunch of my football friends and lacrosse buddies. And I sent out letters to every D1 school and every pro team. And these are back when you had to type the letters individually. So I have a box of 500 letters approximately. And every day I'd get 10 letters. And every day all the letters are like, "Thanks, but no, there's nothing open." And all my buddies got the biggest kick out of it because we would hang a letter of the day up. Someone would just say, "Hey, sorry, no openings." And there would be a 1 line. Or there'd be some guy who took the time to actually write a nice encouraging note that, "Hey, keep at it, please, blah, blah, blah."
Yeah.
So I ended up going into newspaper work because that seemed the next kind of horizontal line, if you would. And I worked at the Milford Times. And my job was sports editor and sports writer, the only staff member. And they had 2 high schools and a junior college around us. So we had pretty good sports to cover. And then I covered one government news, like weekly news thing. It was White Lake, Michigan. So I'd go to the government meetings and they talk about what color floor mats they were putting in the halls and what color reupholstering chairs. And it was the worst ever. And then I did obituaries, and obituaries really taught me the importance of being accurate, because nothing is more upsetting to someone than a loved one dying and you got their name spelled wrong. And had to deal with that a few times till I realized, man, you better triple check your name all the way through, because they're going to call you out and they're not going to be very pleasant about it. So it was a good run. And then it just got to the point where I felt like I wasn't growing, because I was, the stories were kind of the same. Outlooks were the same about the different sports teams. And then you'd pick a star, and the star had usually, maybe a brother went on to be really good or a dad was really good. It was just, changing the names, but the storylines were very similar. And so that kind of wore on me. And it happened that my defensive coach, who I was very close with, took a job at Earlham College. And I was at one of my football friends from Albion wedding. And he had just taken a job there. And he asked me if I was still trying to get into sports information. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, why don't you come and be sports information director at Earlham College in Richmond, Indiana? And you'll get a laugh out of this. Their nickname I always loved was the Hustling Quakers. It was a Quaker school. And I would always argue with them, Hustling Quakers as opposed to what, the lazy Quakers, the sleeping Quakers. So anyway, I ended up at Earlham College coaching football, assistant coaching women's lacrosse, doing sports information work, going to Ball State, working on my master's, and a bunch of other jobs to help get some money because I wasn't getting paid a lot. And that really opened the doors for me to get my first sports information job.
Which was, so you go to Villanova University, and this is,
correct.
At the time, I don't know, you tell me, but it didn't quite maybe seem like a quantum leap, but it was the beginning of the Big East. I mean, things were happening fast. You're in the Northeast. Nobody, I don't think anybody foresaw, the magical forecast ahead for the Big East, but you were right there. What year did you start at Villanova?
So I did 1 year at Earlham, and I quickly decided that coaching we went 0-9 and we're getting hammered. So I went from 9-0 as a player to 0-9 as a coach. I decided that coaching wasn't going to be my
This
calling.
poor guy, he's writing obituaries and he's going 0-9. Early in your life, you're like, man,
Yeah.
I don't know.
That was a good time, though. You know, there's nothing better than being in a college atmosphere 2 years out of college and living it up,
Yeah.
as much as you could. The money wasn't there, but it was a fun experience. So, again, I re-hit. I knew I couldn't stay at Earlham because the money just wasn't there, and I didn't want to be in coaching, and coaching took so much time up. So I started looking for another opportunity, and I again started sending letters out. And Villanova was one school. There was like 4 schools I was looking to had interviews with and was looking to get a position with, and I didn't know much about Villanova at all. I'll be honest with you. I wouldn't have even applied there, except a friend of mine lived near there and told me I should apply there. And it just happened that they had an opening, and my Earlham background played into what the person wanted. So I ultimately got the job. It was 1980 of August. And this is how crazy it was, Pete. I went to visit my friend, and I knew I was in the running for the job. So I stopped by the sports information office on a Friday, and I drove from Michigan 12 hours. Stopped by the office, said, I'll just check in and say, hey, I'm still interested in the job. And the SID wasn't there. So I left a note on his desk and I went and visited my friend. I went home on Sunday, and on Monday morning, the SID called me and he said, hey, you're among my finalists. I want to interview you. If I don't interview you, I won't hire you. But we're not paying for people to come in to interview. So you'd have to come back on your own. So he said, but you can choose the day you want to come do the interview. If you choose to do the interview, I'll give you that much. So I said, all right, I'll do Wednesday. So I got in my car literally that night, Tuesday morning rather, drove Tuesday 12 hours again to Philadelphia from Michigan, stayed at my friend's house, interviewed, got in my car Thursday morning, drove back. Friday morning, he called me and said he would offer me the job if I could start Sunday because football camp started on Sunday. So I made back and forth 3 trips within 5 days. And, it was a great opportunity. Villanova was a Division I football program. Howie Long was a senior that year. They ended up finishing 6-5. They had a pretty good team. I think they lost to your Richmond Spiders that year, though.
Yes, they did, I think.
They lost a close game to Maryland. I mean, they were playing D1, Navy, Maryland, Boston College. They were playing legit D1 football. So that was an eye-opening for me because, I had never been involved, although I've been in football, I've never been involved in D1. But primarily my responsibilities were all the non-revenue sports, which and is what you do at a Division III school. They're all non-revenue sports. So that was really my fit there. And I loved my time at Villanova. It was an amazing 10-year run.
Let me ask you, you started Villanova, and I know the football program shuts down after that first season. And then they have almost like a fire sale, right? Like all the players are. Yeah. How does that work? I remember you telling me a little bit about that, and then doing some research about when SMU was issued the death penalty in the late 80s. The kind of same thing happened where everybody just flocks to campus. What was that like? I mean, Villanova wasn't SMU at the time, but there were a lot of good players.
Yeah, they were a very good D1 program. Truthfully, they weren't top echelon because again, this is 1980. It's not like it is now. Not you don't have some of the mega powers and almost individual worlds that they have in football nowadays. But you're right. When I went to Villanova, they had just joined the Big East. Nobody knew what that was going to be, and that blew up as we went along. Villanova I was in charge of track and field. Villanova was the indoor NCAA champion.
Jumbo Elliott.
1980 had Jumbo Elliott, one of the most famous track coaches of all time. They had all the Irish milers that would come, and then they had the basketball with Rollie was just starting to take off, but the football program had always been kind of an economic drain. They didn't have TV contracts. They were kind of in a loose affiliated conference, the Eastern 8, and it just the school decided that the program had been losing too much money, and that they wanted to put the money into expanding the campus and doing some things that they saw coming down the road. So they suddenly dropped the football program. I remember coming into work and being told by the SID, Ted Wolf, that, the school had made a decision to drop football. Well, in the following days, what Villanova did was they had this old field house, as you know, you're familiar with.
Oh, yeah.
They put tables out there, and I think there was probably 100 football programs that came in and set up it's almost like a college fair, but there was football coaches. They came in and set up a table and said, hey, come to North Texas State, come to Penn State, come to Ohio State, come to, East Carolina. All these different schools were there. And they looked at it almost like, I think they looked at it as like a free agency. Hey, we need some linebackers. Let's go get a couple linebackers. So ultimately, the bulk of the team, although Villanova would honor your scholarship, if you had a scholarship, you were good for the 4 years. You didn't have to play football anymore. Of course, most of the guys that went there wanted to play football, so they ended up transferring to different programs. And they had a couple guys that were very successful at Penn State, Willie Sidnor, Anthony Griggs, I remember, went to Ohio State and was a starting linebacker for them. They had some running backs. They had a great quarterback that went to East Carolina and was a great quarterback at East Carolina. So the players did well on their own, but it was kind of shocking that, again, this was like an open market. Sell your program and sell that the kid could come in and contribute. But it also afforded them to fulfill their dreams, something that, Villanova was kind of ending for them.
You're grinding away. Working under Ted Wolf. This is after that. We were just talking about that kind of open season on the football team. And I guess Ted Wolf, the sports information director, your boss, he leaves at some point, right?
Yes, he leaves after basketball season. And I think that basketball season, if I remember right, Pete, Villanova lost to Ralph Sampson in Virginia in maybe the round of 16 of the NCAA tournament.
Okay.
So they were a pretty good basketball team. I think they lost by like 4 or 5 points, and were in the game most of the way. But Ted Wolf, who was my boss and who had hired me at Villanova, took the head PR job for the Meadowlands that had just opened.
Wow.
And the Brendan Byrne Arena. And
where the Devils used to play, and yeah.
And they did a bunch of college basketball. They brought in a lot of the NCAA regionals, and they did tournaments, and they had a lot of Big East games with whether Seton Hall or St. John's or Villanova, even because of their Jersey
and the
alumni.
Mets played there too, right?
Yes. So Ted was the head PR guy there, and he left, and I think it was spring when he left, maybe later spring of 1981. So here I am, maybe 8-9 months into a D1 job, my first D1 sports information job, and I end up being interim SID. And in addition to the football program Jumbo Elliott had died that winter in between the indoor and outdoor season. But the track and field team was still one of the nation's best. Basketball was really good. Women's basketball had made the AIAW Final Four, which was the predecessor to the NCAA women's basketball. So, I mean, they had a bunch of teams that were amazingly good for the size of the school. This is a 6,000 enrollment school, and had all these great sports teams. So I was really thrust into what an unbelievable opportunity.
Yeah, and it became like just a colossal opportunity when the Big East comes to fruition. And I as a kid, now I get to, or you come into my life, I come into your life. My mom starts to work for the athletic director, Ted Aceto. And I really found my love for sports, I think, at like the foot of Craig Miller in that athletic department, just constantly hanging around there. You would give me the run of the place. I'd be like, I must have wasted so much goddamn money making copies of like bullshit, but it was such an unbelievable experience, and it was such an unbelievable time. Villanova's on ESPN all the time, or whatever, USA Network, right? Whoever was carrying the Big East.
Big East had their own television package. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what was that like? I mean, was your head spinning as this league totally just launches into orbit?
Yeah, no, it was. And, yeah, I was in a conference that had long established PR people, very successful, very acclaimed SIDs. And here I am as a guy who, 8 months, 10 months earlier was at Earlham College, working as a sports information director. So the change was night and day, but the basics were very similar. And I was fortunate that I had some great assistants. Dave Koski and Gaida were my two assistants when I was at Villanova. And I can't stress enough how much I relied on them and how important their contributions were, especially Dave. Dave went on to be president of Spectacor, I believe. So he
with the Sixers, basically, right? Yeah.
Sixers and Flyers.
Yeah.
And he did a great job with them. He was a PR guy for Donald Trump at Trump Plaza in Atlantic City and did all his boxing and athletic promotions. So Dave went on to an amazing career himself. But I was fortunate that Villanova allowed me the leeway to learn a little bit too. And then I had Dave Gavitt and Mike Tranghese and Tom McElroy from the Big East there. What a better group to learn from.
Dave Gavitt I remember, is a Hall of Famer. Yeah. He is, he
was the Big East godfather. I mean, he was the founder of it. I remember he would come in they did Monday night, Big Mondays, he called it, because it was Big East and Monday and ESPN. And it was really the first time that college basketball was getting kind of into a conference only, specific night, specific teams type of scheduling. And he came in and bring a big box of T-shirts that would have Big Monday. And he said, go around the arena, give everybody in the first row one of these T-shirts so they wear it for TV. So, I mean, he didn't oversee, he didn't overlook anything to promote the league. Everything you could do, he did. And of course, the era of those teams with Patrick Ewing and the great St. John's teams and the great Syracuse and Connecticut teams, Sleepy Floyd and great Boston College teams. It was an unbelievable battle. Every game was an unbelievable battle.
And look, and maybe it's me just romanticizing about my youth, but not only were the markets big time, DC, New York, Philly, right, among all the others, and then the players, Patrick Ewing, Derek Coleman, Ed Pinckney, right, and then
Chris Mullin.
Yeah, Chris Mullin, right, Walter Berry. But you talk also about the fact that the media covering, you got guys like Mike Wilbon and Tony Kornheiser and Dick Weiss, and just hanging around, right? Mike Lupica.
Yeah.
And their job is to cover these teams. What was your experience like with those big city media types? I mean, here you are just kind of getting your feet wet. And look, I was listening to Mike Vaccaro, who still writes for the New York Post, was talking on a podcast recently, and he said, in the 80s or 90s, like when everybody was reading the newspaper, as it was told to us from our editor, it was literally grab the guy on the subway by the lapel and say, hey, read this, as like a columnist. So what was your experience like as sports tabloids I find to be fun, but as that stuff started to really kind of take off and you're in the eye of the storm?
Yeah, well, you're balancing a lot of things, Pete. You're balancing the institution's vision, and Villanova was a private Catholic Augustinian institution, very proud of its academics. I'm dealing with Rolly Massimino, who had a love-hate relationship with media. There was some media he loved, and there was some media he hated, and he didn't hide it. And so you were sometimes the person stuck in the middle and balancing it. You're even battling internal issues within the university because who's top dog? Is it football? Is it track and field? Is it basketball? Is it academics? Is it the university? You're trying to find all these balances, and then you're trying to work. For me, I was working, as you said, in some of the biggest markets in the world, and the Big East was so huge that the attention was massive, which was good and bad. I mean, I'd been at a situation at a small college where you begged for coverage, and you wrote stories and sent them to the local newspaper hoping they would publish something of it or the release of something of it. Whereas at Villanova, you suddenly weren't changing from trying to create coverage. You're trying to manage coverage.
Yeah.
And the other thing at the time was, you remember, the Big East was emerging, but the schools were so far behind because you were playing in like Villanova at the Fieldhouse, the Jake Nevin Fieldhouse, sat 3,000 people. And that was, sitting each other one leg on top of the other leg all the way around. And, facilities were really inadequate. Locker rooms were pretty dumpy, especially visiting locker rooms. And, so.
And you have major networks coming in to broadcast games in these closets.
Absolutely. And, then you've got all kinds of power issues, and you got all kinds of lighting issues because they just weren't made for the demands that you were getting. And slowly the Big East arena started to change as well. But part of the great part of my first few years there was playing in these little gyms in Seton Hall. I remember Boston College, Georgetown, McGonigal Hall, I think it's called. They were these all typical, like your high school or elementary school gyms where they had maybe 3,000 seat capacity, but there's a stage at one end in case you have a concert or the band's playing. So, it truly was not a basketball environment. The only thing great was the fans were right on top of you, and the place would blow up. The other part for me that was just super eye-opening was playing at the Palestra and being involved in the Big Five. I had no idea what the Big Five was. I really didn't.
Yeah.
And people would tell me about the glory of the Big Five and the legacy of the Big Five. And here I am, a kid who grew up in Michigan, and I followed Michigan and Michigan State. There was no Big Five.
Yeah.
I didn't know Temple. I didn't know LaSalle. I didn't know St. Joe's. I didn't know Villanova, truthfully, until I started working there. And then I get in the Big Five, and I'm playing at the Palestra, which is another just amazing arena for basketball. If you were listing probably top 5 arenas, I can guarantee you most people would put Palestra in the top 3.
My first experience with the Palestra as a kid, I remember, and I had to be very young, but the thumbprint of the arena was so small, and the stands went up it was so vertical that I remember being terrified of it was like being scared of heights. I almost felt like you were going to tip out of your seat and fall onto the floor. It was that amazing of an experience. It was that intimate and that close. And, a team would score and everybody would throw streamers.
Right.
It was crazy. And everybody hated each other too. The rivalry was real.
It did. And it was always sold out. There were always doubleheaders. It was always middle of winter. So the glass around because they had a lot of windows around, would be all steamed up from the heat inside and the cold outside. It was electrifying when you walked into the arena. I remember going and see various other teams come in and play. Louisville played. DePaul came in and played when they had really, really, number one teams, top 5 teams. Wagner was playing for Louisville one year when I went and saw him play. And it was always just an amazing, and it was certainly a home court advantage when you played teams from outside of Philly. And then when you played the Big Five, you just never knew. Like Villanova may be favored, but there was a couple times where I remember we were heavily favored. St. Joe's just played out of their mind because of the crowd. Yeah. Or LaSalle played out of their mind because of the crowd and beat Villanova. That was an amazing venue to play in.
Now, your relationship, this speaks to your personality. We talked about the fact that you could be gruff. Okay. And now, so
I'm not gruff. I'm to the point sometimes.
But your relationship with Rollie Massimino kind of started off, it was difficult, right? There were some bumps in the road. And you literally, here's a guy, I've worked for coaches. I work for pretty big head coaches. Nobody like Coach Massimino, but you're the PR guy or the sports information guy. What they say is like, you're just like, yes, coach, whatever, coach. You were real with these guys. You would tell them stuff that they didn't want to hear. It's true. You would tell them stuff they didn't want to hear.
I learned to. Yeah. I didn't initially. I was pretty quiet and reserved, which didn't benefit me at all in my first year. So in 1981-82, I take over basketball responsibilities. I get appointed. I'm interim SID. I eventually interview, and I get hired as sports information director. The only person I talked to get hired was the athletic director. That was my interview. Later in life, you go through other interviews, or you have other people do interviews. They talk to the athletic director. They'll talk to the football coach. Of course, there wasn't a football coach at that time at Villanova. You talk to the basketball coach, certainly, and the group gets together and kind of decides who they want to hire. But I just interviewed with the athletic director, and it was because he and Rolly were kind of dysfunctional. They didn't really, they weren't buddies. So, Ted Aceto, the athletic director, did his overall, but Rolly ran the basketball program.
And Ted he's a strong-willed guy. He was a great quarterback.
Sure. He was
at the
great
football
quarterback
team.
at Villanova. A really good, straightforward guy, I thought.
Yeah. But he's not bowing down anybody.
No, but he and Rolly just didn't have a relationship. And so after my first year, I mean, it was a really rough year, to be honest with you. Obviously, the learning curve is huge. And you're learning how to manage to do interviews and, how you're telling the major New York papers they can't have this access or that access. You're learning what the coach is like. But Rolly honestly wasn't really accessible to me. And so at the end of the summer, after a year, we had some Big East conference meetings where we another thing Dave did, he'd bring in all the sports information directors from the school, and you sat and talked around for 2 or 3 days. You played some golf, you ate some dinners, you compared budgets, you compared plans on things, what needed to be better, from communicating with each other, all those types of things. It was really beneficial. And I learned so much because, again, you have all these great sports information directors with amazing longevity and achievements. And I'm kind of hearing what they're saying and learning from them. Oh, it should be doing this way. Okay, I can do it this way. I never knew that. So in the summer, I'm just to the point where I'm feeling like basketball was just so much non-fun. And Rolly obviously didn't like me. And it was a really tough road at that time. I decided, like I've done most of my life, whether I was playing and, something happened playing, and there was a game once where I was told I wasn't going to start the next game. I went to the coaches and tried to find out why. I went, rather than sit on the practice field and wonder, I went and said, what's the deal? And so I kind of took that approach with Rolly, which wasn't a wise thing, but had I been older and smarter, I probably wouldn't have done it. But being young and stupid, I did. So we ended up having this huge argument. And, his point of view was he had no say in hiring me. Had he had a say, he wouldn't have hired me. Because he felt I was the previous sports information director who he didn't get along with. I felt I was his protege. And I made some wise comment like, I'm as much his protege as you are Jack Kraft, who was the previous basketball coach at Villanova, who Rolly respected, but was nowhere near anything like him. And then he got really mad at me, and he said, I could have you fired. And I said, hey, I know that, and I'll get another job. And that seemed to almost shock him and diffuse the situation a little bit, that we got into some of the nuts and bolts of what our relationship issues were. And once we kind of cleared the air there.
You didn't go to church.
Well, I wasn't invited.
That's what he said. He said to you, we go to church, you don't go.
He said you didn't come to mass, pregame masses. And I said, Coach, I said, I don't know how you were raised, but my mother raised me. You got invited to things. You didn't show up at things. And he said, all right, you're invited. You better be at every mass from now on. So I ended up being at every mass 35 times a year for 10 years. So, but he also started to embrace me. And then really what I learned from Rolly was credibility. I mean, if he told me, don't ever lie to me. And I actually took that to heart. And I remember I made a mistake once. And he called me into his office, and it wasn't a big mistake. It was someone I'd set up an interview, and then I didn't get him the right day, and then so he missed the interview, and I had to call the guy and cover it up. But I didn't cover it up. I just told him I had messed up. But Rolly called me and held me accountable, and I just told him, I said, "Yeah, I made a mistake," and he was very gracious. He said, "Yeah, you can make a mistake once." And so I really learned credibility was super important, not only to him, but I learned it was also super important to media. And that's something that I'm really proud of. I think when you talk to a lot of people that at the end of my 40 years of doing this, they would tell you that, I was a professional who was always credible. Like I would never lie to someone. If they had a lead on something that wasn't right, I would tell them they were wrong. And if they had a lead on something and were right, I told them they'd have to go get it substantiated from someone else. So I owe Rolly a lot. And not to say that only later in life did he get help. He was a major influence in why I got the USA basketball job.
Well, I want to. So you mentioned that. So when you retired, Casey Johnson, longtime national basketball writer, covered the Chicago Bulls, a beat writer forever. Very, he's just an esteemed journalist and a guy who covers basketball. He said Craig Miller, who's been on his job for 31 years at USA Basketball, is spectacular at his job and as calm a presence as you will find on the international and national stage. Bravo. So that compliment and that speaks to what you're saying with the credibility. But so that ability to be calm in the eye of the storm really serves you well as this basketball team, Rolly Massimino, who becomes this larger-than-life personality. They go on this run, this school with 6,000 people, and in 1985, you find yourself in the national championship against Georgetown and Patrick Ewing. A lot of people are like, oh, that Villanova, it was the ultimate upset. Look, Villanova had played Georgetown very tough 2 games that season. Now you say
3 times.
3 times. Yeah, 3 times, right?
Yeah. Well, counting that, yeah.
Yeah. So, but you went to overtime, I think, 1 game at the Spectrum, and then you lost by like 7 or 8 points in the other game on the road. And what was that like as this team evolves and this great basketball team, and then they reach the finals in Lexington, Kentucky? What was that ride like from a perspective with media and covering that?
What was that? It was a different era, first off, because, again, not to keep harping on this, but there was no social media. So, you had windows of media opportunity, and then they had their deadlines, usually evening or morning papers, depending on what they were. Same with TVs. So it was a little bit different because, the landscape now is 24/7, 7 days a week. But back then, we were an average team for a lot of the Big East season. We were competitive, and the Big East at that time had a lot of Eastern players in their programs. It wasn't national recruits. Like we weren't pulling guys in from California necessarily or Arizona, or they were New Jersey, New York, Connecticut type guys that Villanova was recruiting and playing with. And the advantage to that was they knew each other in the Big East. So when Ed Pickney played against Patrick Ewing, I remember Ed telling me once, I played him in high school in AAU. This is just, it is what it is. I'm used to it.
Yeah.
Whereas other teams, I think, would come in and play Patrick and hadn't played him, and as great of a player as he was, maybe there was a little more intimidation, unfamiliarity with his game, which certainly would play into his hands. But the Villanova guys were all familiar with the Georgetown and the St. John's players, and the really good teams that year, and vice versa. So it was always super competitive within conference games. But as we went along, and it's well documented that toward the end of the season, team didn't play well. We have a game at Pitt, who was a big rival of Villanova's, and we get blown out, and Coach Mass gets so upset he takes the starters out 1 minute into the second half and puts in all the backup guys for the rest of the game. And we're now like on the verge of not making the NCAA tournament, because I think at that time we had maybe 19 wins or 18 wins. And so the pressure was on to go into the Big East tournament and have to win a couple games.
They just expanded the tournament to 64 teams that year.
Right. And lucky for us, we got a rematch with Pitt. We beat Pitt, and then we played St. John's. And St. John's and Georgetown all year long have been 1-2. So I think we had 5 losses to Georgetown and St. John's out of our loss total. But we've been in every game. I mean, we've been right there. So there was times the team played really well, times. But I remember we lost this game at Pitt. And back then, we were taking vans to the airport, but after the game, we went to get something to eat. And I was in a van with Ed Pickney and Dwayne McClain and Gary McClain. And we were sitting at I remember a burger place, and they were like, man, this is not how we pictured going out. This is BS. Coach shouldn't have taken us out. But he had warned them that if they didn't start playing the way he wanted them to play, he was going to take them out. He was a man of his word. We win a game at St. John's against St. John's in the Big East. We play very well. I think we lose to St. John's. We beat Pitt, lose to St. John's. and end up being a 9th seed for the tournament. And they kind of stuck it to us. They put us at Dayton, playing Dayton. No, we were the 8th seed. Sorry, 8th seed. Dayton was the 9th seed. So we're playing at Dayton, and Dayton is, I think, 16-1 at home. And I remember Coach Bass, who was always great with one-liners, got up at the press conference before the tournament game. The media asked him, well, how do you feel? They're trying to stir up the controversy of being put on their home court. And he goes, Dayton is 16-1 at home. And Coach says, well, technically, we're the home team on this floor, so we're 16-1. It doesn't make any sense, but that was his answer and his thought process. And sure enough, the team goes out and we beat Dayton on a layup by Harold Jensen in the final minute. Very close game. I think we win by 2 points. And they missed 3 shots at the end of the game that could have won it, very short shots. So we win that game, and now we're facing Michigan, who had won, I think, 18 straight games. They were a tremendous team. Had won the Big Ten, and they just weren't Harpley, and they weren't familiar with Villanova or the Big East basketball, and we beat them pretty good. And that starts the run, and there's no pressure on the team because now we've already surpassed probably what the expectations were. The expectations were don't lose the first round, and then let's see what happens. So now we're building momentum. We have, we just had a very fortunate schedule, fortunate in the sense of fitting for us. We played Maryland, who had Len Bias, who had beaten us the year before, or had beaten us earlier in the year. And so we have a rematch, and Bias had a great game against us in their win. And we do a great job of shutting him down and win that game. And then the next game is North Carolina. We play terrible. If you watch that game, you may want to kill yourself. If you're watching it, it's so bad because there's no shot clock. And neither team is playing well offensively. They're both playing well defensively. And, ultimately, Rollie finally breaks, because he had been to a couple Final 8 games, finally breaks that Final 8 stranglehold, if you will. And we beat North Carolina and get to the Final 4. And now it's like party's on, right?
Yeah.
You're kidding me? We're going to the Final 4. And the crazy thing, Pete, I don't know if you remember, Boston College lost to Memphis State in overtime. And had Boston College won, it would have been 4 Big East schools. That's how good they were back then. 4 Big East teams in the Final 4.
I didn't know that about BC. So wow, okay.
Yeah, so it ends up there's 3 Big East teams. And again, rather than getting St. John's, who was a terrible matchup for us because of Chris Mullen and some of their players, Wennington and Barry, we end up getting Memphis, Dana Kirk and what was their big center? Keith Lee,
William Bedford.
They called him air controller, and they had a really good team.
Yeah,
but again, they had never run into like Coach Massimino was known for running multiple defenses and just constantly changing things up, and our constant defensive change and just frustrate them to no end. And I think Keith Lee ends up fouling out with 10 minutes to go, and Ed Pickney has a good game, and what do you know? We're in the final game.
What was it like you're working with Billy Packer and Brent Musburger? They're covering the Final Four in the championship like they did every year at the time. What was Brent Musburger like? Was like as far as how was he?
He was great, and he and Rollie had a good relationship actually, so that made it a lot easier. And Rollie's riding on cloud 9 now, so he's pretty easy to work with.
Yeah.
Everything's good. And if he loses in the Final Four, not that he ever wanted to lose, but we had already exceeded expectations. And I think it served as vindication of what a great coach he was, certification of what a great coach he was. He certainly, in my mind, and I don't understand this, I'm just going to interject this now, he should be in the Hall of Fame. You look at what his record was, the NCAA tournaments and what he did, and his success in the Big East, and his life giving to basketball, whether it was at UNLV or later on at Kaiser University or at Stony Brook before he got to Villanova, he should be a guy that's in the Hall of Fame. But, so we're dealing with these media guys, and everybody's written us off. So it's all like, hey, you guys had a nice run. Good luck. I remember a reporter for the CBS Good Morning America, I think it was, came up to me and said, if you guys should happen to win, and we know you're not going to win, we want to get Ed Pickney on your show, and I want to be first in to claim him. And we just kind of chuckled at that. And I said, yeah, okay, I'll put you down on my list. And yeah, you're first one in for him. Nobody else has even talked to us if we win. Nobody's even mentioned those words. And sure enough, we go out and we're familiar with Georgetown and played a great game. Again, there was no shot clock, which really helped us shoot, I think, 80% in the second half. Harold Jensen, who's a freshman, has a great game. Ed Pickney does a great job on Patrick. Rowley does a great job with kind of game planning and getting things that frustrate Georgetown. It's a low-scoring game, and we end up winning it all. And, then the madness is just totally on because everybody wants a piece of the story.
Was there a moment where all this is happening, like a specific moment where you're like, wow, this is surreal? Was there a time where you're setting up like a major interview, like with the Today Show or something like that? I mean, and you were working for the hustling Quakers, a handful of years ago, really, and now you have all these major. You're the guy.
Yeah, no, it was crazy. Two points there to come to mind is I think we get down 20-12 early in the game, and I say, if we don't close this, we're done. And sure enough, we rallied back to tie the game. And once we got close, I felt like you could feel the pressure come off the team, and you kind of know your teams. You learn to just get a vibe, I guess, from your team, and today's not going to be a great day, or man, they're just really struggling, or man, we are really in tune and playing well. And we hit that, tied the game up early, and I thought, man, this is what we want. We're right there, and we're playing like we wanted to play, and we got a shot, And then the one thing that has always kind of been like most memorable to me, two of the things was I get told to after we win, I'm standing by the floor and I get pulled by NCAA head of their PR saying the president's on the phone, hands me the phone. This is a phone on the scores table with a board and everything. It wasn't wireless. Said, you got to go get Coach Rowley. He wants to congratulate Rowley for winning the national championship. So I'm holding the phone, trying to wave down Rowley. I remember right, I'd set the phone down, go to the court, pull Rowley away from some interviews, get him over to the scores table to talk to the president, President Reagan at the time, and get congratulated. And then I remember getting into the locker room after the on-court celebration, and Ed Pickney is like hyperventilating from all the excitement. And I look, and there's, I don't remember there was a TV, like a national network TV guy in our if I tell the name, it would make a lot more sense, but a big-time guy. I can't remember the name at the moment. And I kind of, what the hell are you doing in here? Get the hell out, because all these guys are, celebrating. And like I said, that is basically about to throw up. And I've always been one appreciating, maybe because my athlete years, the sanctuary of a locker room and locker room celebrations or locker room depressurization if you lose. So I kind of pushed the reporter out. And I will start to walk away, and my buddy Fran Ragazzino, who is a trainer, says, "Holy shit, you know who you just threw out?"
Who was it? Like Bob Costas or Dick Stockton or somebody like that?
It was ABC. It was the ABC guy. I can't remember now.
Jim Lampley?
But it wasn't Chris. I can't remember. It blows the whole story, unfortunately. Not remembering the name, but I didn't even think about who I was throwing out. I was just kind of forcing people out, So those are the stories I remember from that Final Four.
And one thing, I promise we'll move along here so I can get you out of here. But this is just too much fun. One thing that wasn't that much fun for me, for you, for everybody, a year removed, or 2 years removed exactly, Gary McLean comes out with a Sports Illustrated article that he'd been using cocaine. He said he used cocaine at halftime of the Memphis State game. I mean, you read the article, it starts off that he was standing in the Rose Garden behind President Reagan when the team was being honored, and he was so wired on coke at the time that he was ready to fuck around and hit the president in the back of the head.
Right.
Yeah. So I remember my mom, again, at this time, my mom's now working in the athletic department. I know you. I know Coach Mass just from being around. And my mom came home, and I swear she was not in a good mood. And it wasn't often that she was like that. And I remember we asked, like, hey, what's going on? She's like, Gary McLean. I remember my mom said he's a cokehead, and this story is about to come out. The Sports Illustrated article comes out. He's on the cover of Sports Illustrated. I think it said like A Year in the Clouds. It's actually a beautiful cover if you want to throw out what it's based around. And the next morning he's on
18 pages.
18 pages. And the next morning he's on Good Morning America with Joan London and telling his story. Now, is this in between this? And I'm sure people ask you this. Did you have any idea any of this stuff was going on, like, at all?
Well, a couple things there is one, my perspective is different than a lot of guys. I was very close to Gary, Dwayne, and Ed. I mean, very close, to the point where Dwayne McClain borrowed my car for prom. And Ed and Ed was a star, and Ed was one of the nicest guys I've ever met in my life, truly, to this day. He was great to work with. He said the right things. He was smart. He was a hell of a great basketball. And Gary was Gary. I mean, he was a little spark plug. He always had the attitude, but he and I had a very good relationship. So, you win the national championship, a lot of things changes. We started getting a lot of national publicity. People would come into campus, and Coach Mass was riding that train. He was doing interviews and was very happy to be doing those interviews. And then, so you do an interview with some major publication or network, and they say, hey, we didn't think about this, but he talked so much about Ed Pickney or Dwayne McClain. Do you think I could get Ed for 5 minutes? Well, basketball season's over. So I would go, I knew where their dorm was. I'd go to their dorm room, and I'd go in the afternoon, usually afternoons when these interviews are being done, because that's when Coach Mass would do it. I went over kind of unannounced because you didn't have cell phones. You didn't have a way to text them. You had to go in person. So I'd walk across campus, go to their dorm room, knock on their door. If they were in, they'd answer. And I'd say, Ed, I've got ESPN here today. They're doing a thing on the recap of the championship. Could you come over for 5 minutes and do an interview? And Ed being the great guy that he was, or Dwayne McClain being the great guy he was, it was usually those two that people wanted. Although Gary was getting a lot of attention because he had played so well, they'd come over and do it. Now, I'm not naive to things in life, but I never saw anything to indicate anything like that going on. My personal opinion is that, Gary hadn't made it in the NBA. He wasn't big enough. He was a great college player, no question. The championship speaks to that. I think the limelight and promises some money got to him. My understanding was that Sports Illustrated initially gave him a very small down payment on his story, and he went to them and said, I have this story about my drug use. And it may have been like, I don't remember the numbers exactly, Pete, but it was like $10,000 up front. If we end up publishing this, we'll give you $60,000, which was a lot of money back then. So certainly the carrot was there to make something printable that Sports Illustrated wanted to print. And then the second part of this is, during this whole correspondence, Sports Illustrated we start to get wind that Gary's done a story. Gary doesn't tell us, but Sports Illustrated starts calling me to confirm facts. Like on November, I'm just going to throw this out, like on November 12th, did your team do a drug testing?
Yeah.
And this is when random drug testing had just started. So I'd have to go down and, I talked to Coach Mass and told him what it looks like they're doing a story, and he's trying to find out. But every now and then we get a glimpse of something that they're trying to confirm. They talk about recruiting, because Gary brings that up in the story. Did this happen? Did that happen?
Early on, I got to jump in. Early on, did Coach Mass understand the magnitude of what could possibly have been brewing?
I think he did, but I think it was even bigger than he expected. I don't want to say he underplayed it.
No, I think it was bigger than anybody could have expected, Craig.
I think, that was the era of really kind of shock news anyway. Sports Illustrated would do those stories typically throughout the year. It could be NFL drug use or
and it was the only game
gambling
in town. So that's the thing.
Right.
I mean, Sports Illustrated, for people that are, it was, that was it. I mean, that was where you started.
It was
and
like
where you stopped.
it was the Newsweek of sports, or Time of Sports. That was what you followed. You followed your local newspaper, and then Sports Illustrated for national news, really. So we knew the story was coming out. We didn't know what all it covered. We had some ideas from when they fact checked things, and we thought there were some discrepancies and things that they were coming to us with, but they wouldn't give us the full details, So like you'd only know, like I said, if they were trying to verify a date, or the fact that this recruit was visiting this day, or that this happened. So long story short, I remember I think part of the Sports Illustrated press run was done in New Jersey, and someone I had a contact with got me an early edition of it. It wasn't like they
printed Sports Illustrated in New Jersey.
Yes, well, it was maybe regional, but
yeah,
I think what had happened was it goes out to the newsstands. I think on Wednesday, maybe.
Yeah,
because it feels like to me it was a Tuesday night.
So you got your hands on a copy, like, yeah, okay,
yeah, and I'm like, holy shit, right? I mean, first off, I felt like there was a lot of non-truth in it. Again, and it's Gary's remembrance and Gary's vision, so I can't argue with those things, but I can argue some of the other points. So I remember getting into work really early in the morning, really early, like 5:30 maybe, and our parking lot is filled with media. And I don't think, some people knew me, but I don't remember being hounded or yelled at or asked for anything. I kind of come in the back door of the field house where I always came in, but I go right to the basketball office, and one of the assistants was in, and I said, we got to call coach, because I want him to avoid the back parking lot. All these media there, he's gonna look like a guy coming out of court in handcuffs. There are gonna be all the cameras, and what are you doing? And I said, so we called coach, and we kind of told him, hey, there's a ton of media here. And, he was obviously not happy. He was, if grumpy would be a kind way to say it. And I remember telling the assistant, has him on the phone, and I'm in the assistant's room, and I said, tell coach I have a copy of the magazine. He wants to get in and read it before he starts talking. That was my suggestion. And coach's suggestion was for me to take the magazine and shove it where the sun don't shine. And so I knew it was going to be a really, really long period here, a couple of days of trying to fight this. So we end up, coach comes in, and I end up I had very little interaction with the Villanova president, but I was actually called to his office with Rolly and the head of their university PR. And we were discussing very calmly, we had a call, it wasn't like anybody irate, but what are we going to do? And I will claim this to my grave, that I was the one who said, we need to go on live TV, because Coach Mass will be emotional, and his emotions will show he's speaking the truth. And we ultimately do like a 1 o'clock live press conference, I think 1 or 11. Again, it's been 40 years, and some of the details get a little hedgy. So hopefully someone won't say, well, it wasn't 1 o'clock, it was 12 o'clock.
Yeah.
But we do a primetime afternoon press conference at Villanova, and all the local TVs are going live. And Rolly speaks the truth, and he's very emotional during the press conference. And it really helped diffuse the situation, because I think people could see that there was a separation of fact and fiction here. Like, it didn't look like Rolly was covering up or lying or knew or any of that. Gary wasn't that great of a player, I don't think. Coach Mass, as a matter of fact, I'll go back to this. I had said earlier that random drug testing had just kind of started right around that year in 1985. Most programs you could fail one drug test, and then if you failed a second, you would be suspended from the team. And Rolly was an advocate, a really strong voiced advocate at Villanova, that there's no second chance. What we're telling you then is once is okay. And his point was, if you fail a drug test, you're out. You're done. You're history. And I will also add that Rolly was a man of principles. Like, if the team bus, I'm going to use this as an example. If the team bus was leaving at noon, it left at 11:55, and if you weren't on it, tough shit.
Yeah.
He left the team. He left the team chaplain. He left. Never left me. I always made it. The best one was we're at the Meadowlands playing for the Big East champ. We're playing Big East championship. If we win the game, we win the Big East. Ed Pickney missed the bus, was late for the bus. He left him at the hotel and went to the Meadowlands without him. And I remember I was in the press room and I saw a cab pull up, and Ed Pickney waved me down outside at the cab. I go outside. He goes, hey, the elevator broke. I was stuck in the elevator. He goes, I came in a cab. I don't have any money. Can you pay? I had to pay for the taxi cab. I took him into the locker room. Rolly said, hey, Ed, don't bother getting dressed. You're not playing today. You were late. Now, this is for the Big East Championship. This is how principled he was. And I said, Coach, the elevator stopped. And he looked at Marty Marbach, his assistant. Marty, called the hotel, find out if this is true. So Marty comes back and says, Coach, they said the elevator did stop briefly. Said, find out what time that was. And he calls back, finds out it was like 11:56. And Rolly says, Ed, you were 5 minutes late anyway. He wasn't. He was 5 minutes late by Rolly's 5 minute early rule. You know, like if he's leaving at noon, he had to be there 11:55. So if he was on the 11:56 elevator, he was late. He said, you're not playing in the first half. So that's how principled he was. And again, going back to this, I think it you know, his press conference served as a pretty good way to help get our view of things out. And I mean, it was a really long year. We didn't have a great year. There were so many distractions. Coach was very distracted the whole year, you know, and it was
you
his
opened up a new
reputation.
arena, I think, that year, right? Or was it? No, it was the second year.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it was our first full year in the first full year in the arena. And I think we end up in the NIT playing, and you know, it was one of those when the season and LaSalle beats us and upsets us. And I think it's one of those where everybody wanted the season to be over because every game was post game was, what about Gary McLean? What about Gary McLean? And of course, Gary's gone. Yeah. So the only people answering the question are players that had no involvement.
Yes. Yeah.
But that was a really hard time. And it was really a quick introduction to me to crisis PR.
I was about to say, like, it's crisis. You as a young man now, it's like you learned Crisis 101. You went through two major things. One, the ultimate high, winning a championship, where I'm not going to say you're on easy street because you're hustling, you're working your ass off, but it's all positive. And now all of a sudden you get thrown into this fire. And, you know, I think it's got to be so interesting to cultivate your skills. So let's move to, as your skills get cultivated, you end up, you work for USA Basketball, I think, in 86. And then I remember you were at the Olympics in Seoul, right, in 88.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, so what happened, Pete, was I interviewed for the Big East, had an opening for their PR director. They moved Tom McElroy into more of a VP overseeing communications and championships, I think. So I end up being a finalist for it. And I go to Providence and I interview with Dave Gavitt and I interview with Mike Tranghese. And it's in the middle of the summer. And I had been in Colorado when I got the call for the interview. So I cut my vacation short, fly in from Colorado to do the interview. Feel like the interview is really good. You know, I know Dave and I know Mike, and I think my record at Villanova kind of spoke to what I was able to do. And so I go away feeling like, hey, I have a shot at this. How cool would that be to be head of Big East PR? Well, ultimately, I don't get the job. I finished second, or I'm told I finished second. And Chris Plonsky, who was the sports information director at Texas, University of Texas at the time, and who became a great PR director for the Big East during the formative years, and went on to become associate athletic director at Texas, and is head of women's AD at Texas, and does all their fundraising. Amazing woman, amazing career.
Yeah.
Really, 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 really good.
I didn't know she had the ties to the Big East. Okay.
She was there. So she had the job. So, you know, I'm okay. I'm going to go back to Villanova, stay at Villanova. I like Villanova. It's just I was looking to kind of make more money and be challenged in a different way. And I love the Big East. I love Dave Gavitt, his vision, and I love Mike Tranghese and all those guys. I knew them well, so it was just seemed like a great fit to me. So again, part of my directness that we talked about earlier, I decided I'm going to call Dave Gavitt and find out why I didn't get the job. So I called Dave, and he takes my call, thank God, and he's always, as he always was really pleasant. And I wasn't mad. I just wanted to know. So Dave, I thought I had a great interview. You know, what was the difference maker here? And he said, you did have a great interview. He said, but, you know, you're lacking in championship experience. He goes, you know, you did the Final Four with Villanova, but you didn't run the Final Four. He said, you don't do a lot of events at Villanova. And I said, well, you know, that's kind of Villanova. They're not going to ever have an NCAA championship or big events. I said, you know, we do Big East track and we do IC4A, which is the East Coast Track Championships. I said, we do those. That's about my extent of it. And he goes, well, then you got to go outside the university to get that experience. And I thanked him and took it to heart. So I started looking for opportunities, and I went to work for Philadelphia Eagles on game days because, again, Villanova was just coming back with football, but I could have Sundays and managed to do it. And then I also got involved with the U.S. Olympic Committee and did some Olympic festivals, and then ultimately got picked for the 1988 Seoul Olympics to be the press officer for track and field.
Wow.
And of course, those Olympics were the Olympics where
Ben Johnson.
Yeah. That was what I was going to get to. And there was a couple things that happened there that were like crazy situations.
What were they?
Well, you had Mary Decker-Slaney, I think, had something happen during her race, or she was injured.
She fell, right?
We lost. I think that might have been when she fell and tripped with the South African runner who was barefoot. I think it might have been that Olympics. There were some issues with the USA relay teams, but Ben Johnson was the big one, because he tested positive for steroids. And Carl Lewis then extended his gold medal reign, so we had to do some sudden things there where we had to have a press conference pull together out of nowhere and do it. We had teammates that I did a press conference. They were fighting with each other on the podium, kind of like not physically fighting, but verbally. She's no good. She can't even stay in my back heel, type of stuff. And, and then it was really my first experience of being in the Olympics. It was my first experience in the Olympics, let alone in South Korea, which was very, very different in addition. But the one good thing was all these great Villanova runners were running in the 88 Olympics. Vicky Huber was there. Sydney Marie was a miler. There were a couple others. I think the track coach there now, who was a miler, Marcus O'Sullivan, was running for Ireland. And, so it was a lot of fun for me to see and be able to work with, especially Vicky Huebner at the time was the best U.S. distance runner in the country and one of the top in the world. It was a lot of fun for me to be there. But I also remember Chris Plonsky was the PR person for the Olympic basketball team. Of course, under John Thompson, they lose. And it's the first time, it was shocking news because the U.S. gets a bronze medal. And, it's funny how 2 years later I'm started, the position of USA Basketball became available because they had never had a PR person before. And then after the loss in '88 at the Olympics, and then with the addition of NBA players, Dave Gavitt, who's now president of USA Basketball, decides we need to have our own PR person. So that's kind of how that opening and transitioned into it. It was perfect for me because he knew me from Villanova.
Yeah.
They were looking for someone with strong basketball media experience. I had that now because of the Final Four and the various Final Eights and Villanova's success. They were looking for someone that had pro experience because now we're going to bring in NBA players. So you got to know how to deal with pro athletes. Well, I had been working for the Eagles for 3 years. So, I did a lot of locker room stuff. My main thing was doing Buddy Ryan quotes, which was hysterical. But is another part. And then the third thing was they wanted someone that had international event experience. And I had just done the Olympics, and I had done a Pan Am Games, and I had done some Olympic development festivals. So it was just a perfect fit for me.
Did you know that they were going to start with the NBA players? You did, right? So you knew that was going to be the first year.
You knew NBA players were coming, but you had no idea what the level was and expectations. I mean, if you go back and read clips, no way you're going to have the best of the NBA players play. What you're going to have are first-year guys or second-year guys or the 10th man on team. Nobody thought it would be what it became.
Why did it become? Two questions before we get into the experience. Actually, let me just get to the one I want to ask. So the Isaiah Thomas thing? You're a Michigan guy. In '92, Isaiah doesn't get named to the Dream Team. What was your experience with that situation? I mean, you weren't in the room, but people say Jordan kind of froze him out, or said, "Hey, I'm not going to play if Isaiah plays." What can you lend to that, like as far as your experience is concerned?
Well, Russ Granick, who was David Stern's right-hand man, and C.M. Newton, who was Hall of Fame coach, Kentucky AD, Dave Gavitt were the three power brokers, along with Bill Wall from USA Basketball. David Stern had completely thrown his support behind the idea, seeing the possibilities of expanding internationally. 1990, remember, the NBA didn't have a lot of NBA players. I think 1990 was the first year some two Russians were maybe playing in the league. And so the door was slowly opening for the best around the world to play. I think David Stern had this vision of a super team and being able to do it. And to have the super team at the time, you had to have Michael Jordan. You could have had everybody else, and it would have been a great, 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 memorable team. But it never would have been to the level of the Dream Team if you didn't have Jordan, truthfully.
Yeah.
I remember Chuck Daly getting named head coach early into the process before we had named players. So you thought probably Isaiah was top player at the time, was going to be part of it. But, as you alluded to, it has come out over the years that maybe Jordan and Isaiah weren't good friends or friends at all, and that it was pick one or the other. You weren't going to get both. And I don't think there was much of a decision at that time in terms of if you were really looking to have the best of the best in this historic team. You had to get Michael Jordan. And to get Michael Jordan, you had to get other players first. So you got Magic, which certainly was important. You got Barkley, you got Ewing, you got Scottie Pippen, you got Stockton and Malone. So suddenly now you got David Robinson. You suddenly now have a really, really good team. Now can you get Jordan on board and with the other players? And thankfully he had a good relationship with Magic and with some of the other guys. I think Scotty at the time as well. I think that all enticed him to being able to do it. And then I think Chuck Daly was able to sell him, hey, look, this is going to be enjoyable. I like to play golf too. We're going to go play golf. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And so, Jordan came on board, but the caveat being that it wasn't going to include Isaiah. And, in business, hard decisions have to be made sometimes. They're not always fair. But you certainly can understand, and you can't go back and say, well, they made a mistake there, didn't they?
Yeah.
I mean, was Isaiah legendary enough to be on that team? Absolutely.
Sure. Yeah.
Would you have had Jordan? No. So, or it appears no, I should say. I don't know, have firsthand knowledge of that. It certainly appears from what he said.
Let's give me I got you for 20 more minutes, all right? And then I'll let you get on with your life.
Okay. I'm fine. Whatever you want. I'm retired.
So what was a moment ramping up to that 92 Olympics that really sticks out to you where you were like, this is different? Besides the fact that you had an NBA all-star roster, the best team assembled ever, looking back now. But what was something where you were like, wow, this is different. These guys are different.
Well, it was kind of a snowball rolling downhill, if you will. We did a lot of planning. but we never knew to say that we knew the magnitude that this would reach, even though we thought it was going to be very big, would be lying. At least myself, it would be lying for me. I knew it was big. I'm not, nobody's that dumb. But you didn't know, if you thought it was a 10, it became a 30, honest to God. But it didn't become like 10 to 30. It became 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. It just kept growing and growing and growing. And there's a couple stories that I'll always remember. We had training camp in Monte Carlo, and we wanted to make it attractive for the players. We're going to scrimmage, have an exhibition game against the French national team. Monte Carlo is an amazing, affluent city. The best of the best, if you will. There's not much that excites Monte Carlo. So we go there for a site preview, and we go to this beautiful hotel, the Lowe's Hotel, and we meet with the Lowe's manager, and we're setting up meeting space and hotel rooms and everything else. And I remember talking to him about when the team arrives, security and things like that. And he said, Monte Carlo is a place of kings and queens. Nobody here will care. And we're like, oh, take you for your word, but we think maybe not. And the night we arrived in Monte Carlo, they had this huge open parking lot. There must have been 5,000 people in front of the hotel and screaming for the team. The team kind of gauntlets its way into the hotel to check in. And I see the manager standing at the door smiling. And I said, this is the land of king and queens. We do not get excited. He goes, I have never seen this before. So that was kind of really one of the sending off points. The other one was the first day of practice in San Diego. I think we had at this time, you didn't have the internet connections and things that you did. We had 15 satellite trucks show up at the gym. Jeez. And all these were live feeds of news coverage from San Diego. National news networks covered the team's first practice. So you're kind of blown away by that. And then, we had the qualifying tournament in Portland, and teams are taking photos of the players, and they're, off on the bench, they got their cameras, and rather than watching the game, they're taking a picture, or after the game, they're taking pictures. And, the crowd is just going crazy. The hotel scene is crazy. And it just, every step of the way got crazier and crazier. And, the other thing that really sticks in my mind is our first arrival in Barcelona. We had this huge security presence. We got a motorcade in front of us. We got a motorcade behind us of security officials. We've got a helicopter flying above the bus. That's a security helicopter. They take us to the village where we get credentialed. And as we're walking through the village, there must have been a line a mile long, and I'm not kidding you, 5 or 6 deep of athletes who are just in a line to cheer the team on. Now, these are world-class athletes in their own right, just drawn to the team. And so that, that's what I mean. Every step of the way, kind of something would shock you. And then the hotel itself that we stayed in Barcelona, once word got out where we were, there was easily 4,000 or 5,000 people every day outside the hotel just hoping for an autograph, a photo, or something. And you kind of just lived that life. It was I think Chuck Daly said it was like traveling with the Beatles, and that really was kind of what it was like. And the team was great. I mean, they all got along. Nobody had a super ego. They were super competitive with each other. I think they were mostly respectful to the international competition. It certainly launched international basketball to the success that it is today.
Yeah. When you're there, 92, that's the ultimate high, I would imagine, or in your early career. But then, you fast forward 12 years in 2004, and it had to be a low or a tough situation when you have Larry Brown as the coach. The team goes to Greece, and you guys lose. You get the bronze. And Allen Iverson is Larry Brown's guy, and he's on the team. You got Steph Marbury on the team. You had this collection of guys, but they really weren't. Tim Duncan, yeah, but they weren't in sync. LeBron, Carmelo, those guys are there. They're not playing. They're kind of pissed. What was the hardest part about being a PR guy for that team?
Well, that team had a couple had some difficulties beyond the control of the team a little bit. To go back, remember in 2000 Olympics, we're a 3-point shot away from losing to Lithuania. Lithuania misses a 3 in the final seconds. A good look, top of the key, wide open kind of 3, rims out. We win by 2 points. We go on, win the gold medal, beat France by 10 points. So we're no longer like just super blowing people out, right? It's not like 96, 92, where we're winning by 40 and everybody's having a good time and nobody's worried about the competition. 2001, we go to an event called the Goodwill Games that's in Australia. And we take young NBA players, like first, second, third, 4-year. Nobody's superstars, are all good, very good 4-year players. We beat Brazil in overtime. So 2002, we have the World Championships in Indianapolis. I think we lose 3 times with a pretty good team. So the international culture and game has completely changed now. Internationally, they've caught up. Caught up much quicker than most people thought. Part of that's due to so many international players playing in the NBA. Now they're no longer intimidated because they play every day against them.
Yeah.
The one U.S. advantage up to that point is our depth. We have 12 NBA players where a lot of teams have 5 or 6. So when you sub out, there's a little bit of a drop off, and that's where we start to break games open, it seemed to me. So 2003, we have to qualify because we didn't win the 2002 World Championship. So we go to Puerto Rico. We have an amazing team that is back on par to me with the Dream Team results. We're winning by 40. We're beating some really good teams. We're beating Argentina. I think we beat Argentina by 40, and then we beat them by maybe 12 or 14 in another game.
Argentina would ultimately beat you guys in 2004.
Correct,
yeah.
correct. But we had like a team that was completely different than what we ended up in 2004. We had Tracy McGrady. We had Michael Bibby, I think. We had Vince Carter, I think. We just had a great team, and we were supposed to have that team play in 2004, but this is now becoming the Olympic year. Every Olympic after 2004 becomes some sort of threat. In 2004, it was a terrorist
after 2001.
After the Australian Olympics,
okay.
Every Olympics from then on, since then, has had some sort of threat.
And it's after 9/11 too.
Well, it could be. It was that in 2004 for sure. There was, one of the mosquito viruses in one year. There's COVID in 2020. There was 2016 was a polluted water in Rio.
Yeah.
And, there was something in every Olympics after 2000 that I recall. But 2004, the threat was there's going to be a terrorist attack. And a lot of the players became security concerned. And I think we went through about 30 players to
I
get
remember
to our
that.
team.
I was you gave me the opportunity, took me into your home, helped me jumpstart my career, and I was literally working for USA Basketball as an intern, living with you, living with Sean Ford towards the end. And I remember hearing you and Sean talk about, and just being at the office, it's like Mike Bibby dropped out. He's basically, he's spooked, T-Mac dropped out, all these guys.
Yeah.
And it really was, and this is me just behind the scenes, you did a masterful job. You really did, USA Basketball, putting together that team of so many notable players. And the problem was they didn't mesh. And like you said, the culture and the competition had caught up.
And also, you lose a year of continuity. I mean, if we had taken the team from 2003, they had played for Larry.
Yeah.
You take them to 2004, they already know a lot of his stuff. He's more comfortable. They're more comfortable. You go. So now you're throwing together a team that is almost completely different. We end up adding LeBron, D. Wade, and Carmelo Anthony, who are 18 years old, and they just finished 18 or 19 and had finished their first year. And I always thought that was an odd addition. I mean, granted, part of it probably was NBA wanting to expose these guys on a world stage. Everybody could see that they were going to be superstars, I think. But again, Larry Brown didn't like to play young players. So it's not like it's a great fit bringing these 3 young guys onto his team. But yeah, so Tim Duncan is so frustrated by the international game. Here's a guy who's very rarely in foul trouble and was in foul trouble every game. And his famous quote was when asked about his Olympic experience. I remember after the Olympic, in the mixed zone at the Olympics was FIBA sucks, because the game just didn't fit him at all. And so he's always on the bench because he's never got, he's always in foul trouble, or not always, but most of the time. Allen Iverson is, probably one of the better players. You remember we actually lost an exhibition game. First time we ever lost an exhibition game before 2004.
Was it Puerto Rico?
We beat Puerto Rico by 20, and then played Puerto Rico in our opening game and get beat by 20. So it's a 40-point turnaround. We lost to Italy by 20, and then we beat Germany on a Allen Iverson 3/4 court buzzer beater. Otherwise, we would have had 2 losses. So we kind of could see things weren't great. The chemistry wasn't great. Coaching and the players didn't fit great. So we end up losing. Yeah, we lose 3 times, but miraculously they sucked it up and won the bronze medal, which sounds funny, but when you lose, what happens is you go into the bronze medal game, which for the U.S., it's such a disappointment. To get players up to play for a bronze medal is a huge accomplishment. And that is the most underestimated thing in sports, is the USA basketball playing for a non-gold medal, because it's just so hard to play for something that you're considered a failure.
Yeah.
Right. You didn't win gold, you're a failure. So who cares about the bronze medal? But to their credit, they sucked it up when we won the bronze medal, which is a pretty good achievement, considering we really didn't play well.
What was your experience when the ship kind of turned around? I mean, it was after that year in 2004, some changes are made, and it's Jerry Colangelo and it's Mike Krzyzewski, and all of a sudden we recapture that USA basketball dominance and pride. Yeah,
it changed from a committee approach where you had a committee of 10. It would be various NBA general managers, and typically NBA general managers would say they wanted this player to get more experience from their team, so let's put him on. So you weren't truly always getting the best fit of a team. I mean, the players were all good players, but you may have been missing a swingman, or you may have wanted a different guard that was going to distribute rather than shoot, or those types of things. So USA basketball now hasn't won gold, didn't win gold at the World Championships, doesn't win gold at the Olympics. We know we got to change things. So Jerry Colangelo is brought on board as a general manager. David Stern swings that deal. And of course, Jerry at the time was owner of the Phoenix Suns and longtime basketball guy from the 60s with the Bulls and other teams, and very, very, very respected general manager, owner. And he comes in right away and changes everything. And it was amazing to see how he would.
What was the biggest change he made that you noticed, like, wow, this is going to be effective?
Salesmanship and expectations. I mean, he had a vision. He would sell to the players the vision. He would sell to sponsors the vision. He would hold you accountable. He empowered you. He empowered players. He empowered coaches. He empowered every staff member. I know I felt totally empowered. I loved working with him.
That's so important when you're doing your job.
He didn't interfere. He'd ask things, and if it made sense, then all was good, So to me, and he had good charisma, he had, it was later in his life, so he was well established, and he's probably the best part about it was he's very genuine and patriotic about the USA and the team. Like, it really bothered him, I think, and he states this, to watch the team lose, and to watch the team lose and not be in a certain style on and off the court, and representative in a certain style. So all those things became really important to him. And he did a great job of inviting basketball people to be involved in USA basketball. He held a meeting where he brought in all the former Olympic coaches and players, and they talked about who could coach the team, what kind of players they wanted to get. And, they had Dean Smith there, and they had all the former coaches that were there, Rudy Tomjanovich and
Again,
just
he's empowering people. He's empowering these legends.
Jordan's there. I mean, Jordan comes in as a player, and former players come in, and everybody gets an opportunity in this meeting to speak their piece of where they think things have gone wrong and where we need to go. And Jerry hears it all, and he doesn't make them part of the process, but their comments become part of what he builds. And, Jerry's a very direct person as well. And he goes right to the players and starts recruiting players and, telling them why they're needed, what their role is going to be. But the important step here is finding the right coach. And, a lot of people had thought that it would have to be an NBA coach. And, ultimately, Jerry decides that it's going to be Mike Krzyzewski, who had an extensive experience with USA Basketball. He was an assistant coach for the Dream Team. He coached the World Championship team, head coach in 1990, coached, the 84 Olympics, was an assistant with Bobby Knight. So, had this great program at Duke. So getting Coach K on board, and Coach K and Jerry were like, it's a good comparison. Salt and pepper are together. They were like one in the same visions, one in the same patriots.
And
here's
that's
Coach
so
K,
important to have that camaraderie and continuity when you're trying to win a championship.
Same vision, and they're both patriotic. Coach K went to, the West Point Army. So don't come any more patriotic than that. He's a competitor. He loves to win. He has the respect of NBA coaches and players. So it became a very good fit. And then they went out and recruited players. But even then, we lose the 2006 World Championship, even after we kind of get our program. And that's part of our learning process that, NBA guys still need to develop a little more respect for the international competition. And, that was really, after 2006, we didn't lose again. And, that's an amazing run. I think it was 99-1 was the record that we, and, Coach K and Jerry each year, would have a large pool of players who wanted to be involved, and you had to come to practices to show and be invested. And then maybe you made the team, maybe you didn't. And if you didn't, maybe you made the World Championship team. And, we went through 2008 Olympics, 2010 World Championship, 2012 Olympics, 2014 World Championship, 2016 Olympics. Nobody had ever done that. No program in basketball had ever done that. Even when we were really good in the 60s and 70s winning the Olympics, we weren't winning the World Championship. So, it was a remarkable run, a really remarkable run. And we had the best of the best. And I honestly believe we represented the United States in the best possible manner in every one of those Olympics. There was virtually no episodes of anything. There was no on-court annex. The players understood. They respected the game. They respected their opponents. And, they deserve the credit for really helping turn around where we were and what we were doing, what we were about.
So I got two more things before I let you out of here. One, you grew very fond of Kobe Bryant. What was something about Kobe that made him so attractive to you as a person or a player? Because I know that you appreciated the way he handled himself and the way he worked with you on and off the court.
Well, first off, can't fool yourself and think that you have much in common with NBA players. I mean, look at me. I always say my basketball career ended when you started to have to jump in the JV basketball high school team. I had to jump for a rebound. That was my end was clearly in sight because I could not get up in the air. So, you don't have a lot in common. You don't have a lifestyle like them. You don't have money like them. So to me, it's important that they recognize and appreciate and treat you well. Appreciate what you're trying to do. I'm trying to make it easier for them. What made attractive to me coming into USA Basketball was Dave Gavitt, Russ Granick, and CM Newton. When I interviewed, I asked how much control will I have over things we do with the media, like practice access and availabilities and things like that. And they said, totally, it's going to be your call. So, I did
that
this.
is huge, because a lot of times, whether it's the coach or the GM or the team president, even in the NBA, they'll try to control that stuff.
Right. Or they don't want to, they don't want to capitalize on it or make it something big, And again, it's different. Being an NBA team is different than being the USA team. There's a certain entitlement that media and the public feel like with a USA team. They don't feel necessarily with the San Antonio Spurs or New York Knicks. But USA is different. And that was one of the things that led to me being hired, was the 8A team and close practices and things, things that John liked to do that he did at Georgetown that weren't like, I'm sure they expected it to happen with the Olympic team or agreed to let it happen with
Coach
Thompson, but it wasn't well accepted by the media and by the public. So, one of the things I did that they said probably wouldn't work was when I had the dream team, I did 30 minutes of media availability for everybody. And when we were in Portland, we had individual stations for players. So they sat on a podium with a table and a mic. And we had 12 of them. And each player did 30 minutes after a game of practice. And nobody thought they would do it, but the players, to their credit, agreed to do it. And my promise was, if you do this, it's going to eliminate 99% of my interview requests for you. The rest of the day, you're going to be able to do things without having to, because everybody's going to have access to you.
Yeah.
And it worked out. It worked out great. So we always kept that going all the way through all the rest of the Olympics. Now it changed in different formats. We tried groups of 15 minutes and 15 minutes of 6 players and 15 minutes of 6 players and other little intricacies to try and improve on it. But ultimately, we were still making incredible availability. So going back to your question about Kobe, what I liked about Kobe was, one, he knew who I was. And sometimes you just feel like even though you're around the team 24/7, they don't know your name, or they don't know you, or they don't care to know you. And I get it. I mean, everybody's different. There's, different ways to approach things, but he always knew your name. And if I went to him with an interview request, I always felt like he was hearing what I was saying, because I would try to say, okay, here's why this is a good interview for you. It's not, it's not mom and dad's newsstand. I remember going to him when we were in Beijing and saying, we have an interview request from the woman in Beijing who's like the Winfrey Oprah of
Oprah Winfrey,
the U.S. Oprah Winfrey, thank you, of the U.S. She has like an incredible viewing. I've pulled up millions and millions of people. It was like the prime show on China TV. And I said, she wants 30 minutes. And he looked at me and said, all right, that sounds like a good deal for me. 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, you let me know where you're going to set it up, and then I'll be there. And, I different guys have different media feelings. Some guys will tell you, yeah, and they don't want to do it, and they don't show up and do it. Or you got to look for them and go find them, or, there's all kinds of things. But it's 7:55. Kobe walked down to the room that we had set this interview up, shook my hand, shook everybody's hand, cameraman, sound man, how you doing? Good to see you. Talked to the lady off screen for a little bit, sat down, knocked out the interview. So he was very businesslike, and he had a very good understanding of business. You could see that he understood the value of doing certain things. But mostly he was just a pleasant guy off the court to be around. If he didn't want to do something, he didn't beat around the bush. I mean, no, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
And I respect that. I the ones that I always had a hard time were like, yeah, come back to me tomorrow. Well, that meant I had to tell the media to wait a day. And the media didn't know, like, are you actually working on this? Is there a shot of doing this?
Yeah,
are you just putting me off?
Yeah.
So you're just dragging guys. And I hated doing that. But at times, if you're hoping to get the interview, you say, all right, I'll wait a day. Mm-hmm. And then it becomes a week. And then finally, you've got to push the athlete to make a decision. And if they haven't done it in a week, the answer is going to be no anyway. So you just want to know so that you can tell the group to move on, that, sorry, that can't get this interview scheduled. But yeah, Kobe was, at least, and I got to know him really well because we did a lot of things after practice. He would go to the soccer matches. So we would have a shuttle bus that would take him from the basketball practice venue about an hour away to where the soccer was being held. And I'd ride on the bus and we'd do maybe a phone interview or two. So I got to know him pretty well because it was just me and him on the bus. And then I would take the bus back to the hotel and catch up with other media things that I had to do. But I got to know him riding on the bus to those games. And I remember one of the things that struck me later on, a few years later, we had this event called the Hoop Summit where it's the top high school seniors in the country play against a world team. And it's in Portland. And it happens that the Lakers are playing Portland. And we have the players at the game. And then 2 days later, they play the Hoop Summit. But the players all want to meet Kobe. So I go down to the locker room, and Kobe's coming out of the locker room. I say, Kobe, we've got 12 of our Hoop Summit players here. They're all high school guys. They're really hoping to talk to you. Would you mind talking to them? And he's like, oh, absolutely. But the best part of this whole thing was like when he comes out of the locker room, I kind of reintroduced myself to him because I think it's been 4 or 5 years since he had been at the Olympics, 2012 Olympics. You know, they meet a lot of people, and I haven't really been involved with them since. So I did, hey, Kobe, Craig. He looks at me and says, what, you think I don't remember your name now? I said, come on, Craig. We're boys. So I appreciated the fact that he remembered you, you know, despite the fact that you expect maybe not.
Yeah.
And then he talked to the players, and he talked what a great opportunity representing the U.S. is, playing for USA basketball is, his Olympic experiences. He just did a really nice job where he could have got on the bus and said, hey guys, good to see you. I'm on the bus. Got to go. But he, you know, that's just kind of my remembrance of Kobe.
Hey, last question. How was Jay Wright as a roommate?
Jay's my boy. He's great. Jay and I, for those listening, Jay and I roomed together at Villanova. He was a grad assistant and I was the SID, and I had a house, and it was a duplex, and it had 3 floors. And on the 3rd floor, we had this, like, because of the V-shaped roof.
I remember.
Had this attic area that was a finished area for a bedroom. And I managed to sell Jay on being my roommate and paying me some of the rent for that room. And the funniest thing is that room would get about 300 degrees hot in the summer because we had no air conditioning. And poor Jay would come out. He'd rather sleep in the office, I think, than sleep at home. But yeah, we had a great time, Jay, and you know, we kept in touch because Jay started coaching for USA basketball, and then of course coached was a member of the national team and coached for the 2020 Olympics in Tokyo, which were held in 2021. Funny, they never changed the number, but they, you know, if you look it up as
and you got another gold medal.
Got another gold medal, and it was great to see Jay go out on top. And you know, all the best to him. And of course, with my Villanova ties, I was so proud of all he accomplished. Certainly brought Villanova to a whole new level.
And he brought the family back, I felt like. I mean, not that Steve Lapis was trying to take it away or anything, but, you know, Jay had such an incredible job, or such an incredible, strong tie to Coach Mass, and it really was a beautiful thing.
He did. He has that ability, and he has the ability, if you talk to him, like if there's 10 people in the room and he's talking to you, feeling like he's directing it to you, not the other 9 people. So you feel like there's immediate bond with him almost. And he's just such a fun-loving, good guy. You know, it's and his wife Patty. I've known her since because they were dating when we were rooming together, and she's an amazing woman. Life of a head coach is not an easy life, but she's managed to keep Jay grounded, as I kid him, and she's done a great job of keeping the Villanova community involved. And certainly, you know, Jay's rightfully a Hall of Fame coach, and just I look at him as a really good friend.
All right, so you maybe you're writing a book. If you need me to take that out, I can take it out. But you're writing a book.
No, you're fine.
Yeah, all right. So you got to come back on when you write the book. All right, you make me a promise.
Sure, love to. I'd love to do that. I've got chapters kind of outlined. I'm, like I said, kind of dotting the I's on timing and years, because, you know, you think this happened in 1 year, and then you realize, you go back and look for it, and oh yeah, it happened 2 years before that, or a year later. So trying to nail down some of the specifics, but I have some really good stories. I just want to tell some of the fun and not so fun stories of dealing with these guys, the NBA guys, or some other great experiences that I've had growing up. Because as we hit on, I've been part of some really amazing sports teams.
Yeah.
I talked about my Albion friends as well that I communicate daily with. But I'm part of the Albion or the Villanova 1985, and we have a group text that Chuck Everson, who was the center on the team, kind of organized and run. And it's just the players and the managers and myself and the athletic trainer. And the 15, 20 of us that are on there, there's something every day that's funny about their lives or something going on with their kids. Or, Wyatt Maker was on there, was just inducted into the Hall of Fame in the Lioness, California. So news like that, and it is shared. And it's been, think about it, it's 1985 and we're still in daily contact. That's how close that bond is on with the team. And same with, like I said, with my Albion team and even to an extent, some of the USA basketball people I work with. Jim Tooley, who became a great friend and a great boss.
The best.
Has been unbelievably to me through the years. Renee Felton, who took over after I left USA basketball, has been so gracious and kind to me and kept me kind of involved when needed to be, but up to date on things from time to time has been great. And I just can't say enough about the whole organization. You see why they're successful, whether it's Villanova basketball or USA basketball. They're successful because of the people and the great camaraderie and the dedication to each other.
Well, you're a common denominator, and I love you. I love your family. I love your wife,
love you
Liz,
too, man.
And your kids. And you know that. I mean, I can never.
I know that. And Pete, I'm proud of you.
Yeah.
And you're doing great. I love your podcast. I love your I love your view on life.
I got a contract with ESPN, the guaranteed like college football and college basketball, 30 games.
Awesome.
Yeah, from and that's since we talked from August till into basketball season.
That's awesome.
Yeah, well, you're to thank for that. I mean, I'm not lying. Like I know how we're formed as kids. When we're very young, our brains are formed, and being around you. I mean, I spent so much time with you, and sports documentaries. I mean, preparing for these games for me is like looking at a media guide. I get a rush. I literally get the same dopamine hit I used to get from doing drugs. I mean, it really gets me gassed up. So yeah, I absolutely love it, and you are like a huge part of that.
Well, thanks. I mean, you were a sports nerd when you were young, and look at you now, you're still a sports nerd. No, but we've had some great times, and your family has been so tremendous to me. Literally, they were my adopted family when I was at Villanova.
Craig used to come over and watch The Simpsons and America's Funniest Home Videos. My mom took
after the Eagles.
Yeah,
give me a little
and
credit.
The Eagles on Sunday afternoon. My mom took him under her wing, and then my dad. We all welcomed Craig. I mean, it was such a beautiful, magical thing, and to be able to talk to you now,
I look at you and your brothers as almost as my brothers, truly, because I felt like all those years we spent time together. We really developed that bond, and your mom has always been one of the most special people in my life. Obviously, that's evident by she became godmother of my son.
Yeah.
So it's our families are intertwined, and certainly you and I are intertwined more than most because, you did kind of put up with me for the summer here at the USA Basketball.
Can't get rid of me.
This has been a Rogue Media Network